Imagine losing everything, your savings, your wealth, and facing starvation due to an economic collapse. It's a nightmare we all hope never comes true. But what if it did? I've created something unique for you, a purely fictional story crafted to immerse you in that chilling scenario. Creating these videos takes immense time and effort. All I ask in return is a simple like and your thoughtful comments. If you're enjoying my content, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. If you'd like to go the extra mile, you can support me on Patreon too. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. This is Alex, and tonight, I'm speaking to you from the edge of a silence so deafening it could crush a man's spirit. Wall Street, the heart of American ambition, has fallen silent. No shouts of traders, no clinking of bells marking the beginning or end of the day. Just an eerie, oppressive quiet hanging over a street that once symbolized hope, progress, and wealth. I pass by Wall Street myself today, or what's left of it. The marble steps, polished for decades under the weight of confident strides, are now cracked and stained. The famous Charging Bull statue stands as if mocking the few souls wandering aimlessly, clutching their lives in shreds of paper once called stock certificates. Empty coffee cups roll in the wind where bustling cafes used to stand. A ghost town doesn't even begin to describe it. How did we get here? That's the question I've been asked more times than I can count. And every time I try to answer, I'm struck by how layered this collapse really is. This wasn't a single mistake. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a slow unraveling disguised as prosperity until it was too late to stop. It began with whispers, rumors of instability in the housing market. Do you remember that? Just a few shaky loans, they said. Nothing to worry about. Then came the inflation. Groceries costing double, rents climbing like mountains no one could scale. People grumbled, but they adapted. That's what we do, isn't it? We adapt even as the ground beneath us starts to crack. Policy missteps followed like clockwork. Rate hikes that squeezed the breath out of small businesses. Corporate bailouts that padded the golden parachutes of the already rich, while families begged for scraps. And then the global crisis. A conflict overseas, a disruption in supply chains, and suddenly, the house of cards we built our entire economy on started to tremble. I wasn't always sitting here in this studio. Back in the day, I was a kid from the suburbs, wide-eyed and dreaming. My father worked in a factory, my mother in a diner. We didn't have much, but we had hope. Every Christmas, Wall Street would light up, a beacon of something bigger, something worth striving for. I remember standing with my family on a frigid December evening, staring at those lights and believing they were for us too. Now when I think of those lights, I see something else, greed, the kind that consumes everything in its path. Somewhere along the line, we forgot about the people at the bottom. We got so focused on numbers, GDP, stock indexes, quarterly earnings, that we stopped seeing faces. We stopped seeing the workers, the teachers, the parents struggling to make ends meet. And here we are. Look around you. The bustling streets, the skyscrapers once filled with ambition, they're empty now. Boarded up windows, for sale signs, families packed into shelters, their homes repossessed, their futures stolen. I can't help but think of those old pictures from the Great Depression. Bread lines, desperation etched into hollow cheeks. Back then we said, never again. And yet here we are, watching history repeat itself as if we learned nothing. As if we ignored every warning. And tonight, as I sit here speaking to you, I wonder, will we learn this time? Or is this just the beginning of a new kind of darkness? This is not just a story of numbers or graphs. It's a story of people, of lives upended, dreams crushed, and a nation brought to its knees. And if you'll stay with me tonight, I'll tell you everything. The truth, the pain, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of hope. October 17th, 8:43 a.m. The day everything came crashing down. The day we all woke up to a nightmare we'd been too blind, or maybe too afraid, to see coming. The opening bell on Wall Street never rang that morning. It wouldn't have mattered if it had. The damage was already done. I was watching the live feed from a trading floor, the way I always do before going on air. At first, it was just confusion. Traders standing in clusters, talking in hushed tones, their eyes darting between each other and the monitors. By 8:46 a.m., that confusion turned to panic. Numbers that were supposed to be green were blood red, flashing so fast that even the most seasoned brokers couldn't make sense of them. A few brave souls tried to shout orders, but their voices were drowned out by the rising tide of chaos. By 9:02 a.m., it wasn't just the traders. Panic spread like wildfire, emails pinging, phones ringing nonstop, the cacophony of despair echoing through the building. The markets weren't just falling, they were in free fall. And the worst part, no one knew how far they would drop, or if they'd stop at all. Outside, crowds were already gathering. People who'd heard the news rushed to their banks, desperate to withdraw their savings. But the banks had locked their doors. ATMs went dark, screens reading, temporarily out of service. People started banging on the glass, screaming for their money. For some, it was their life savings, their children's college funds, their retirement, gone. I've spoken to people who were inside that day. Brokers, clerks, even janitors. One broker, a 30-year veteran, told me he'd never seen anything like it. He said, "Alex, it was like watching an avalanche in slow motion. You know what's coming, but you can't stop it. You just have to brace for impact." There were whispers too, people saying it wasn't just bad luck or a natural cycle. Some believed it was sabotage, that someone somewhere had orchestrated this collapse. I don't know if that's true, but in the face of such devastation, it's easy to look for villains. Then there's the story of Dr. Evelyn Hart, a name you might not know, but one you should. Dr. Hart was a financial analyst, a brilliant one. For months, she'd been ringing alarm bells about what she called an economic tsunami. She published papers, held press conferences, even testified before Congress. Her message was simple. The system was a house of cards, and one strong gust would bring it all down, but no one listened. Politicians called her a fearmonger. CEOs dismissed her as overly cautious. Even the media, people like me, barely covered her warnings. It wasn't sensational enough, not until it was too late. The last report she released was 2 weeks before the crash. I have a copy right here. She wrote, "Our financial systems are interlinked in ways we do not fully understand. One failure will trigger another and another until the entire structure collapses. Without immediate intervention, millions will lose everything." She was right, and we ignored her. Now Dr. Hart is missing. Some say she fled the country, fearing for her safety. Others say she's still here, working in the shadows, trying to find a way to rebuild what's been broken. Wherever she is, I hope she knows she tried, and that's more than most of us can say. By noon, the effects were no longer confined to Wall Street. Businesses across the country started shutting their doors. Restaurants, retail stores, factories, places that had weathered decades of economic storms, folded in hours. Employees showed up to work only to find locked doors and signs that read, "Closed indefinitely." I remember getting a call from a friend in Chicago. He worked for a small manufacturing company. He told me they were ordered to shut down immediately. No notice, no severance. He said, "Alex, I've got 3 kids. What am I supposed to do?" I didn't have an answer for him. I still don't. By the evening, it was chaos everywhere. News stations broadcast images of protests outside banks, people clutching signs that read, "Where's my money?" Others were less peaceful. Police clashed with rioters in cities across the country. Fires burned in the streets. And in the midst of it all, there was this overwhelming sense of disbelief, like we were all trapped in some collective nightmare we couldn't wake up from. That was the day the market fell. A day that will be etched into our collective memory forever. But what came after, that's the part we weren't prepared for. Because the crash wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of a world we never imagined living in. When the market fell, it wasn't just numbers on a screen or a headline in the paper. It was the first crack in a dam that had held back years of pressure, years of neglect, and years of systemic rot. And when that dam broke, it unleashed a flood that drowned everything in its path. The first to fall were the banks, hundreds of them, from towering giants on Wall Street to local institutions that had served small towns for generations. Their vaults, once overflowing with deposits and investments, were suddenly empty. People rushed to withdraw their money, but they were met with locked doors and security guards who could only say, "There's nothing left." The layoffs came next. Entire industries crumbled overnight. Factories shut down, assembly lines went dark, and office buildings became ghost towns. Millions of people, ordinary, hard-working men and women, were sent home with nothing but a final paycheck that wouldn't even cover a month's rent. And the rest of the economy followed, like dominoes falling one after another. Small businesses dependent on loans and credit were wiped out. Grocery stores couldn't restock shelves. Pharmacies ran out of essential medicines. The entire system, so carefully built over decades, collapsed in a matter of days. I've heard stories that keep me awake at night. Stories that make me wonder how we let this happen. Let me share some of them with you. There's a woman I spoke to yesterday. Her name is Marcia. She's a single mother of two. Before all this, she had a steady job at a local diner. Not much, but enough to get by. When the market fell, her job vanished. Her landlord raised the rent, blaming economic uncertainty, and within weeks, she was evicted. I found her sitting on the curb outside what used to be her apartment, clutching her children, with nowhere to go. She told me, "I did everything right. I worked hard, I paid my bills, and now I'm here with nothing." Then there's Harold. He's 72 years old, a retired teacher. Harold spent his entire life saving, putting aside a little bit of every paycheck to build a nest egg. When the banks collapsed, so did his pension. He told me, "I've got $40 left in my wallet, and after that, I don't know." Harold should be enjoying his golden years, but instead he's standing in line at a soup kitchen, wondering if he'll survive the winter. And then there are the wanderers, people who've lost everything, reduced to scavenging. I saw a man yesterday digging through a dumpster behind a closed grocery store. He was wearing a suit, or at least what was left of one. His tie was loose, his shoes worn down. He didn't look at me when I walked by, but I could hear him muttering under his breath. He kept saying, "It wasn't supposed to end like this." I don't know his name. I don't know his story, but I know there are thousands like him, wandering the streets of cities that used to be alive, searching for scraps to survive. This is what the collapse has done to us. It's not just an economic failure, it's a human tragedy. Homes that were once filled with laughter now sit empty, their windows boarded up. Streets that were once vibrant are now lined with tents and makeshift shelters. Families torn apart, communities shattered, and through it all there's this overwhelming question. Why? Why did this happen? These stories aren't isolated. They're not exceptions. They're the new reality for millions of Americans. And as much as it pains me to say it, the worst may still be ahead. In the coming days, weeks, and months, we'll see more fallout, more heartbreak, but we need to face it together, to understand how we got here and what we can do, if anything, to rebuild. Main Street, the heart of America. It used to be a place where life thrived, where kids rode their bikes on sunlit afternoons and families gathered at diners and parks. Now, it's a battlefield, not one of bullets and bombs, but of hunger, desperation, and survival. Let me paint a picture for you. The sidewalks are lined with people, men, women, children, standing in endless lines that snake around buildings and down alleys. These aren't the lines for movie theaters or holiday sales that we used to know. These are food lines, soup kitchens trying to stretch what little they have to feed mouths that grow hungrier by the hour. Volunteers behind the counters work tirelessly, their faces etched with exhaustion and guilt because they know they can't help everyone. And when the food runs out, there's a silence that hits harder than any words ever could. Look around these neighborhoods now, and you'll see boarded up windows, overgrown lawns, and empty houses. Once these were homes, places filled with warmth, laughter, and life. Now they're just shells, reminders of what we've lost. Families have abandoned them, driven out by foreclosures, or the simple fact that they couldn't afford to keep the lights on. The local shops and businesses that gave these streets their character, the bakeries, the bookstores, the corner delis, are gone. Closed signs hang in the windows, their colors faded, as if even they've given up hope. These streets, once alive with the hum of daily life, are now silent, save for the occasional sound of footsteps as someone searches for anything to hold on to. Desperation is a strange thing. It changes people. I've seen it in their eyes. People who once walked with pride, who stood tall. Now they shuffle, their heads bowed, their hands trembling as they reach for whatever help they can find. I met an older man yesterday. His name was Henry. He told me he used to own a small hardware store. Nothing fancy, but enough to support his family. Now he spends his days walking the streets, hoping to find odd jobs or discarded cans he can sell for a few pennies. He looked at me and said, "Alex, I worked my whole life. I never thought I'd end up like this." I want to share a letter I received. It's from a woman named Clara. She lives in Kansas with her 2 children. Here's what she wrote. "I don't know if you'll read this, but I need someone to know what's happening to us. I have 2 kids, Emma 9 and Toby 6. Their father left a few years ago, and we've been making it work, just the 3 of us. But now, I don't know how much longer I can keep going. I lost my job when the diner closed. My savings are gone, and the bank took our car last week. Every morning, I stand in line at the church, hoping to get enough food to last the day. The kids don't understand. They keep asking when we're going to have pancakes again. Pancakes, something so simple, but it feels like a dream now. Last night, Emma asked me if Santa Claus would still come this year. I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. I just held her and told her to go to sleep. Please, if anyone out there is listening, don't forget us. We're still here. We're still trying." Clara's story is one of millions, each one unique, yet all painfully familiar. People struggling to keep their children fed, to hold on to some shred of normalcy in a world that's falling apart. And the hardest part, there's no end in sight. This isn't just an economic collapse. It's a collapse of humanity, a test of who we are and what we'll do for each other. Some have risen to the challenge. Volunteers working day and night, strangers sharing what little they have. But others have turned to darker paths. I've heard reports of people stealing food from soup kitchens, of neighbors turning on each other, even of fights breaking out over scraps of bread. This is what desperation does. It strips away the layers of civility, leaving raw, unfiltered survival. And yet in the midst of it all, there are moments of light. Small acts of kindness that remind us of who we are, or at least who we used to be. Main Street was once the backbone of this country. It was where dreams were built, where lives were lived. Now it's a battlefield, but even in the darkest times, there's still hope. People like Clara, like Henry, they're holding on, even if it's by a thread. If you're out there listening to this, don't give up. Help each other. Remember what it means to be human, because in the end, that's all we have left. When survival becomes a luxury, morality becomes expendable. That's the grim truth we're living with now. Crime isn't just rising, it's consuming us. Theft, riots, violence, it's no longer the exception, it's the rule. Desperation has become the new currency. Picture this, a grocery store on the edge of town. A place where families used to gather on weekends, where kids begged their parents for candy, while clerks smiled and stocked the shelves. Now it's a shell of what it once was. Windows shattered, shelves stripped bare, the walls scorched from fires set by looters who didn't care what they destroyed as long as they got what they needed. It's not just the stores. Homes are being broken into. People stealing from neighbors they've known for years. Cars are being hijacked on open roads. And when night falls, the streets become unrecognizable. You can hear it in the distance, the sounds of chaos. Fights breaking out, screams echoing through the darkness. The occasional gunshot that serves as a grim reminder, trust no one. Law enforcement is overwhelmed, stretched too thin to make a difference. Police stations are understaffed, with officers abandoning their posts to protect their own families. In some places, entire departments have collapsed. In others, vigilante groups have risen, taking justice into their own hands. But even they are no match for the sheer scale of the unrest. It's not just about theft or violence. It's about survival. People are fighting over scraps of food, over a single bottle of water. I heard a story just yesterday about a man who was attacked for a loaf of bread. He didn't even make it home. Let me tell you about Jonathan Blake. He was a man who had everything, or so it seemed. A successful business owner, the kind of person who wore tailored suits and drove a car most of us could only dream of. Jonathan wasn't just wealthy, he was respected. People in his town admired him, envied him. But when the market collapsed, so did Jonathan's world. His investments vanished overnight, every last dollar. His business followed soon after. One by one, his employees left, the doors closed, and the for sale sign went up. Jonathan held out as long as he could, but when the banks came for his home, he had nothing left to fight with. I saw him yesterday, walking along the railroad tracks with a shopping cart full of scraps. His suit was gone, replaced by a threadbare coat and mismatched shoes. He told me he's been scavenging, searching dumpsters behind restaurants, hoping to find anything edible. But it wasn't his words that struck me. It was his eyes. There was nothing left in them. No pride, no hope. Just a hollow emptiness. He said, "I used to think this couldn't happen to me. People like me don't end up like this. But now I don't even know who I am anymore." Jonathan's story is one of many. It's a story of what happens when the world as we know it crumbles, and we're left with nothing but the fight to survive. In every city, every town, there are people like Jonathan, people who once had everything, now reduced to shadows of themselves. Some turn to crime out of desperation, others simply fade away. And as the days go on, the lines between right and wrong blur further. How do you judge someone who steals a loaf of bread to feed their starving child? How do you condemn someone for fighting to survive in a world that's forgotten them? It's not just individuals. Entire communities are rising up in anger, in frustration, in desperation. Protests have turned into riots, and riots into full-blown rebellions. Government buildings are being stormed, officials driven out of their offices. People are demanding answers, demanding solutions, but there are none to give. I heard about a protest in Chicago last week. It started as a peaceful march, people holding signs and chanting for change. But when the police arrived, tensions boiled over. What started as a call for help turned into chaos. Buildings were set on fire, windows smashed, and by the end of the night, the streets were littered with broken glass and broken bodies. This is what we've become, a nation tearing itself apart, not because we want to, but because we don't know how to do anything else. When survival is all that matters, everything else falls away, morality, community, even humanity. And yet, I can't help but wonder, is there a way back from this? Can we rebuild not just our economy, but ourselves? Or are we too far gone? Trust. It's the foundation of every relationship, whether between friends, families, or entire nations. Without trust, everything falls apart. And right now, trust is in ruins. Let's start with the government. For decades, we were told they had safeguards in place, that our economy was unshakable. They assured us, time and time again, that we were secure. But where are they now? hiding behind closed doors, pointing fingers, and offering empty promises while the country burns. The banks, the so-called lifeblood of our economy, they were the first to fall. When the crash came, it wasn't just stocks that collapsed, it was the faith of millions. People lined up outside banks, desperate to withdraw their savings, only to find locked doors and closed permanently signs. The corporations too played their part. The greed, the short-sighted decisions, the refusal to heed warnings. They built this house of cards, and now we're buried in the rubble. Do you remember the speeches? The televised addresses where officials promised stability, told us to remain calm? Those words mean nothing now. Every press conference, every stage photo op, it's just theater. A distraction while they scramble to save themselves. I've spoken to people who've lost everything. Retirees whose pensions vanished. Small business owners crushed under mounting debt. And you know what they all say? The same thing. They knew. They knew this was coming, and they did nothing to stop it. And maybe they're right. The warnings were there. Analysts and experts waving red flags, shouting from the rooftops. But no one listened. Or worse, they listened and chose to ignore it. I see it in the people I meet. The way they talk about the government, the banks, even their neighbors. There's a bitterness, a skepticism that wasn't there before. They don't believe in anyone or anything anymore. And maybe they're right not to. When you've been lied to, betrayed, and abandoned, trust isn't just lost. It's destroyed. In the absence of trust, people are taking matters into their own hands. Communities are banding together, forming their own systems of barter and trade. It's primitive, but it works. People are trading bread for medicine, fuel for blankets. They're creating their own rules, their own order, because they can't rely on the institutions that failed them. But this self-reliance comes with a cost. I've seen neighborhoods turn into fortresses, with barricades at every entrance and armed guards patrolling the streets. There's no unity, no collective effort to rebuild, only pockets of people trying to survive, each one more distrustful than the last. Let me share a story with you. It's about a man named Michael, a father of 3, a mechanic who worked for 20 years at a local auto shop. When the crash hit, his savings vanished overnight. He went to his bank, desperate for answers, and was met with silence. No one could tell him where his money went, or if he'd ever get it back. Michael told me he trusted that bank. He'd been with them since he was 18 years old, built his life around their promises. And now he's left with nothing. He said to me, "Alex, I don't trust anyone anymore. Not the government, not the banks, not even my neighbors. Trust got me here, and I'm done with it." His story isn't unique. It's the story of millions. People who trusted, who believed, and who were betrayed. This collapse of trust isn't just a failure of institutions. It's tearing us apart as a society. The divide between the haves and the have-nots has never been greater. Those with resources are hoarding them, fortifying their homes, and hiring private security. Those without are left to fend for themselves, scraping by on whatever they can find. And the anger, it's building. You can feel it in the air, see it in the faces of the people. It's only a matter of time before that anger erupts, before the distrust turns into something far more dangerous. Trust is fragile. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. And right now, we're living in the wreckage of broken trust. The government, the banks, the corporations, they all let us down. But here's the thing, we can't survive without trust. We need each other, whether we like it or not. So if you're listening to this, ask yourself, what can you do to rebuild that trust? Not in the institutions that failed us, but in the people around you. Because if we can't find a way to trust each other again, then this collapse isn't just economic. It's the end of everything we are. When systems crumble, people don't stop needing to live. Hunger doesn't wait for recovery. Thirst doesn't pause for stability. And so as the official economy lies in ruins, a shadow economy has taken its place. Bartering has become the lifeline for millions, a primal system resurrected from humanity's past. Across the country, makeshift markets are springing up in abandoned lots, parking garages, and back alleys. People trade what little they have for what they desperately need. A loaf of bread might cost a gallon of gasoline. Medicine is worth its weight in gold. Cigarettes, once considered a vice, are now as valuable as currency. Black markets are thriving, but they're not what you think. They aren't filled with luxury goods or contraband anymore. No, the new black market deals in life itself. Cans of food, clean water, infant formula, blankets for the cold nights ahead. It's a grim irony, isn't it? The basics of survival are now the most coveted commodities. These markets are dangerous. There's no regulation, no oversight. Fights break out over misunderstandings, over greed, over desperation. I've heard stories of people being robbed or worse on their way home from these markets. It's a gamble every time you step into that shadowy underworld, but for many, it's the only option left. And yet there's a strange kind of order in the chaos. People are finding ways to make it work. Farmers are trading fresh produce for batteries. Mechanics are repairing bikes in exchange for canned goods. Families are pooling their resources, forming small networks of trust in a world where trust is almost extinct. I wanted to share what's happening here in Michigan. There's a man in town. He used to own a hardware store. Now he's running this barter system out of the back of his shop. You can trade tools for food, firewood for clothes. It's not much, but it's something. It's keeping people alive. That's the kind of resilience we need right now. Folks like that are the glue holding their communities together. What kind of world have we created where a young man like Joey has to risk his life just to put food on the table? Where a mother has to trade the last of her possessions for medicine to keep her child alive? This isn't just survival. It's a test of who we are, of what we're willing to do to make it through. And while some of these stories give me hope, others leave me wondering if we've already lost too much. But not all of these markets are built on fairness or community. There's a darker side, one driven by greed and exploitation. There are people out there who see this collapse not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. They hoard resources, inflating prices to levels most can't afford. They prey on the desperate, trading necessities for favors, for labor, for things I won't even mention on air. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, darkness doesn't just come from the collapse of systems. It comes from us, from the choices we make, from what we're willing to do to survive. If you're listening to this, know that you're not alone. Somewhere out there, someone is fighting the same fight you are. Someone is struggling, sacrificing, surviving. There's an old saying, when the rich catch a cold, the poor get pneumonia. I never fully understood the depth of that until now. In the wake of this economic collapse, inequality hasn't just widened, it's become a chasm. Those who had wealth to cushion their fall are struggling, yes, but they're surviving. The poor, though, they were already on the edge, and now they've been pushed off the cliff. The collapse has laid bare the brutal reality of our society. While the privileged still have access to dwindling resources, hoarded food, private security, fortified homes, the poor are left to fend for themselves. Soup kitchens are overwhelmed, shelters are at capacity, and the streets are filled with people who have nowhere to go. In some places, entire neighborhoods have been abandoned, left to decay as their inhabitants scatter in search of work, food, or simply hope. I want to talk about the people we don't see on the news. The ones whose stories are too raw, too painful, too uncomfortable to tell. The single mothers, the elderly, the disabled, those who were already struggling before this collapse shattered what little stability they had. In the shelters, you'll find mothers like Rachel. I spoke with her yesterday. She was holding her son's blanket. He passed away last week. Malnutrition, she told me. She lost her job when the factory shut down, lost her home when she couldn't pay the rent, and finally lost her son because she couldn't afford food or medicine. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and said, "What kind of world lets a child die because his mother can't buy bread?" I didn't have an answer for her. This letter was sent to me by a listener in Kentucky. Dear Alex, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need someone to hear my story. My name is Lydia. I'm 63 years old, and I've worked as a janitor my entire life. When the crash happened, the school where I worked closed down. They told me I'd get my pension, but it never came. Now I'm living in my car. Last week I met a young man, barely 18, digging through a dumpster behind a grocery store. He was crying. He said he hadn't eaten in 2 days. I gave him my last can of soup. I haven't eaten since, but at least he had something. I'm not writing this for sympathy. I just want people to know we're out here. We're hungry, we're scared, and we're human. Lydia's letter is just one of many. Every day, I receive messages like this, each one more heartbreaking than the last. The poor and vulnerable are being forced into impossible choices. I've heard stories of parents skipping meals so their children can eat, of elderly neighbors pooling their last coins to buy a single loaf of bread. And then there are the ones who have nothing left to trade. No food, no money, no possessions. Some are resorting to scavenging in trash heaps, hoping to find scraps that aren't too spoiled to eat. Others have turned to the black market, risking their lives for the chance to barter what little they have. And then there are the truly desperate, those who've turned to crime, or worse, just to survive. I heard about a man in Chicago who sold his only winter coat to buy formula for his infant daughter. He froze to death 2 days later. His name was Marcus, and he was 28 years old. His daughter, Emily, will never know her father's sacrifice. There's a cruel irony in all of this. The people who built this country, the ones who worked the hardest, who sacrificed the most, are the ones suffering the most. They didn't ask for this. They didn't make the decisions that led to this collapse. But they're the ones paying the price. And the worst part, they've been forgotten. The headlines don't mention them. The leaders don't address them. It's as if they don't exist. If you're listening to this and you have even a little to give, I'm asking you, no, begging you to help. Share what you can with those who have nothing. Look out for your neighbors, your friends, your community. Because in times like these, kindness is more than a virtue. It's a necessity. We're all in this together, whether we like it or not. And if we forget that, if we lose sight of our shared humanity, then this collapse will take more than our wealth and stability. What went wrong? Let's take a moment to step back and ask ourselves a simple but monumental question. How did we get here? I've been hearing from listeners around the world, each message a reflection of the pain, fear, and confusion that has followed the crash. And they're not just from major cities like Paris, Berlin, or Beijing. No, the devastation is touching corners of the globe that were already struggling long before this. I want to share a few of these voices with you now. To help unpack this, I've been reviewing the final words of one of the most respected voices in finance, Dr. Victor Hathaway. For those who don't know, Dr. Hathaway was a financial analyst whose warnings, though dismissed at the time, now read like a chilling prophecy. In his last public statement, just days before the collapse, Dr. Hathaway outlined the sequence of events that brought us to this breaking point. He called it the perfect storm, a confluence of deregulation, speculative bubbles, and unsustainable debt. According to Hathaway, it began years ago with sweeping deregulation of the financial sector. Banks and corporations were given unprecedented freedom, and with that freedom came greed. Without the safety nets of oversight and accountability, risky investments became the norm. Entire industries were built on the promise of infinite growth, ignoring the limits of reality. Then came the speculative bubbles. Housing markets, cryptocurrencies, tech startups, everything became a gamble. Investors poured money into ventures with little more than a hope and a prayer. When profits soared, so did egos, and warnings of instability were drowned out by the roar of greed-fueled optimism. But the real danger, Hathaway said, was the debt. Personal debt, corporate debt, government debt. It had been piling up for decades. Credit cards maxed out, companies borrowing against future earnings, nations printing money to cover deficits. We were living on borrowed time, and when the first domino fell, the rest came tumbling down. Dr. Hathaway pointed to the global crisis as the spark that ignited this powder keg. A trade war with devastating ripple effects, a cyber attack that paralyzed key systems, natural disasters that disrupted supply chains. He warned that we were one bad day away from collapse, and yet his words were ignored. Why? Because the truth wasn't profitable. Acknowledging the danger meant slowing down the profit machine, and no one wanted to be the one to pull the brakes. Dr. Hathaway didn't live to see his predictions come true. He passed away from a sudden heart attack just days after his final report was published. But his work remains a grim roadmap of what's to come. Hathaway predicted that the economic recovery would take at least a decade. The collapse wasn't just a financial one, it was systemic. Rebuilding trust in institutions, restoring markets, and stabilizing currency would be a slow, painful process. The crash wasn't contained within our borders. Hathaway warned that the interconnectedness of the global economy meant that our fall would drag others down with us. Already, we're hearing reports of other nations experiencing similar crises. Europe's markets are crumbling, Asia's supply chains are paralyzed, and developing nations are on the brink of humanitarian disasters. In times of despair, people look for someone to blame. Hathaway feared the rise of political extremism as desperate populations turned to leaders promising easy answers and quick fixes. History has shown us what happens when fear and anger are weaponized, permanent scars. Perhaps most chillingly, Hathaway suggested that some things might never recover. Entire industries could disappear. Generations would grow up knowing only scarcity and struggle. The psychological toll, he said, would be immeasurable. I want to share something from Dr. Hathaway's final interview. It was recorded a week before the crash, a quiet conversation in his study. His voice, calm and measured, carried a weight that I didn't fully grasp until now. Alex, he told me, this isn't just a financial collapse. It's a collapse of values. We've built a system on greed, on exploitation, on the idea that we can take and take without giving back. That's why it's failing. And unless we learn from this, unless we change, the system we rebuild will fall apart too. He paused, looking out the window at the city skyline. The question isn't whether we'll recover, he said. The question is whether we'll learn. And if we don't, the next collapse will be worse. I remember sitting there, watching him speak with such certainty. I didn't want to believe him. But now, here we are, living in the ashes of the world he tried to warn us about. So what does this mean for us? Dr. Hathaway's predictions are grim, yes, but they're not guarantees. They're warnings. We have a choice even now in the midst of this collapse. We can cling to the old ways, to the greed and short-sightedness that brought us here. Or we can build something better, something more resilient, more humane. But that choice won't be easy. It'll require sacrifice, cooperation, and a willingness to confront the truths we've been avoiding for too long. It'll mean listening to voices like Dr. Hathaway's, even when they tell us things we don't want to hear. I often think about what Dr. Hathaway would say if he were here now. Would he see hope in our resilience or despair in our desperation? Would he see the seeds of change or the stubborn roots of our old mistakes? I don't have the answers. All I have are his words, and the faint hope that we can still prove him wrong about the worst of it. Before the collapse, life was predictable. We knew where we were heading, at least we thought we did. The future was about growth, innovation, and endless possibilities. Now that future seems like a distant dream. What we're living in is a new reality. A harsh, fragmented world where everything is uncertain. The way we live has changed in ways we never could have imagined. People have learned to adapt to survival, not as individuals, but as communities. The streets that were once lined with towering skyscrapers and busy cafes are now lined with makeshift homes. Abandoned buildings have become refuges, reclaimed by those who've nowhere else to go. In the face of collapse, many are turning to communal living, pooling what little they have left to survive. Old neighborhoods are being rebuilt, not by corporations or governments, but by the people who were once too busy to notice their neighbors. Bartering has become the new economy. Tools, food, skills, everything has value. In some places, people are even growing their own food on rooftops or in empty lots. Urban farms have sprouted where once there were only parking garages. It's not much, but it's something. And in this new world, something is enough. The reliance on fossil fuels is gone, at least for now. With the economic collapse, the global supply chains have been obliterated. Oil and gas prices skyrocketed beyond reach, and the old world infrastructure has crumbled under its own weight. In its place, people have turned to what they can control. Solar panels, wind turbines, and even makeshift hydroelectric systems are becoming the new standard. Power isn't just a commodity anymore, it's a lifeline. I've spoken to engineers and survivalists who've taken it upon themselves to create decentralized energy grids, small, local systems that don't depend on the government or corporate interests. It's not the perfect solution, but in a world where the lights don't always stay on, it's a godsend. One listener from Colorado wrote to me about how his family had converted an old abandoned mill into a microgrid, providing power to the surrounding houses. They've set up wind turbines and a small solar array. It's not much, but it's enough to keep lights on, charge radios, and power the medical equipment of the elderly in their neighborhood. In a world that feels like it's falling apart, these pockets of self-sufficiency are the new hope. Even in the darkest of times, humanity has a remarkable ability to find light. There's a kindness that flourishes amid hardship. When the systems we relied on disappeared, when the government failed us, it was our neighbors who stepped up to fill the gap. I've heard stories that remind me why we keep fighting. I spoke with a woman named Tanya in Arkansas, a single mother of 3, trying to make ends meet after losing her job in the chaos. She told me how, despite her own struggles, she had opened her doors to a family in need. Their house had burned down in a fire, and they had nowhere to go. Tanya didn't have much to offer, but she shared what she had. A small meal, a roof over their heads, and a place to sleep. It's not much, she said, but it's what we've got. And if we don't share, what's left? And that's the truth of it. As much as we've lost, the human spirit is still capable of great things. There's something humbling, something deeply moving about the small acts of kindness that are taking place every day. People are coming together in ways we haven't seen in generations. In small towns, neighbors have formed food cooperatives, sharing what little they have left, making sure that no one goes hungry. In cities, people are organizing free clinics, offering medical help to those who have nowhere else to turn. It's not enough to undo the damage, but it's a start. It's a reminder that, even in the face of overwhelming disaster, we still have each other. Perhaps the most striking thing I've noticed over the past few months is how people are rebuilding, not just physically, but emotionally. In the past, we were isolated, living separate lives. each of us in our own bubble. But now, communities are coming together to rebuild, not just homes, but relationships. There are stories of groups of people taking turns to watch over the elderly, of parents teaching their children skills that no school could ever offer, how to grow food, how to make things by hand, how to survive when the world around you is falling apart. Some are even taking the opportunity to teach one another about the world that was, the knowledge and skills that were once taken for granted. A retired history teacher from Maine has begun holding classes for young people, telling them about the history of the world that led to the collapse, hoping that they will be able to build something better when they're older. Others have started community councils to make decisions collectively, sharing power instead of letting a few hold it all. This isn't a return to the past, but rather a new foundation, a new kind of community where survival isn't a solitary endeavor, but a shared responsibility. For the first time in a long time, people are looking out for each other, and it's in these moments, this sense of unity, that we see a glimmer of hope. Tonight I want to share a story with you. A story about one person's remarkable resilience in the face of overwhelming despair. It's the story of Joshua Fields, a listener who wrote to me a few weeks ago. He's living in what was once the outskirts of the city, an area now abandoned, yet somehow he has managed to carve out a life. Joshua's story isn't like the others we've heard over the past months, of families losing everything, of people desperate for food and shelter. Joshua is one of the few who managed to build something sustainable in this new world. He started his farm a year ago, long before the market crash sent the world spiraling into chaos. At the time, it was a personal project, a small act of defiance against the growing reliance on store-bought goods and the unending rise in prices. He grew vegetables, raised chickens, and began to develop a small, self-sufficient system that he could rely on. Little did he know how vital that decision would become. When the crash came, when the stores closed and people were left scrambling, Joshua's farm became a sanctuary. He had enough to feed himself and his family, but more importantly, he had enough to share. Word quickly spread, and soon, neighbors from miles around came knocking on his door, desperate for a chance to trade or work in exchange for food. What started as a small, personal endeavor turned into a lifeline for the surrounding community. Joshua isn't alone in this. There are others like him, quietly building the foundation of a new society in the ruins of the old. But his story stands out, not just because of what he built, but because of the way he built it, through kindness, determination, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of survival, even when it seemed like all hope was lost. I spoke with Joshua just yesterday, and his words left an impact on me. He told me I didn't do this to be a hero. I did this because I had to. And now I'm not just surviving, I'm helping others do the same. His farm has become a center for more than just food. It's a hub of activity, a place where people come not only to barter, but to share knowledge. Joshua hosts workshops on sustainable farming, how to gather water from rain, how to preserve food for the long winter months. He's taken it upon himself to teach others what he's learned, knowing that knowledge is just as valuable as any physical resource. The resilience of people like Joshua has sparked a quiet revolution, one rooted in self-reliance and community. It's a stark contrast to the chaos we hear of in the cities, where desperation and fear have set in. But here, in Joshua's little corner of the world, people are coming together to rebuild. He describes how neighbors, once strangers, are now working together as a collective, pooling resources, sharing skills, and offering whatever they can to ensure no one is left behind. What once seemed like an impossible dream, a community in a world where everything was designed to separate us, is becoming a reality. Joshua's story is not the only one, but it is rare, especially when we look at the broader landscape. Outside of these small havens, across the country, the despair is tangible. Cities are abandoned, the homeless are now the new majority in many areas, and the once bustling marketplaces now stand empty. The windows boarded up, the signs of capitalism's failure visible at every corner. But what's striking, as Joshua's story demonstrates, is that in the face of such widespread collapse, pockets of survival are emerging. It's easy to focus on the violence, the theft, the loss of everything we once knew. It's easy to get caught in the downward spiral of hopelessness. But in these small, quiet victories, like the growth of Joshua's farm and the sense of purpose it has given to his community, we see the true power of human resilience. The contrast is stark. Where some see only darkness, others see the potential for light. It's not about wealth or power anymore. It's about survival and rebuilding the world on a more equitable foundation. Joshua doesn't have much. He doesn't own land, he doesn't have stocks or savings, but he's found something far more important, the ability to give. In a world that has lost so much, he has managed to create something that not only sustains him, but offers hope to others. As the world continues to grapple with the aftermath of the collapse, it's clear that our old notions of wealth are no longer relevant. The dollar is all but useless in many places, and people like Joshua are demonstrating that the true currency now is cooperation and community. The barter system, once dismissed as archaic, is thriving in places like Joshua's farm, where a loaf of bread might be traded for a jar of homemade jam. In many ways, Joshua has inadvertently become a leader, though he would never admit it. He's not leading in the traditional sense, with speeches or grand gestures, but by living in a way that aligns with what so many of us are now learning. That survival is not just about having enough for yourself. It's about having enough to share. It's about lifting each other up. And that, I believe, is the most important lesson in all of this. Survival isn't just about holding on. It's about helping others hold on too. In this new reality, the only way forward is together. And Joshua's story, though just one of many, reminds us that hope is never truly lost, as long as we're willing to work for it. Maybe we're still a long way from the world we once knew. Maybe the scars of the collapse will take years to heal, maybe longer. But in these small, resilient pockets of survival, we are witnessing the birth of a new world. It's not perfect, it's not easy, but it's ours. And as long as we keep fighting, we might just make it through this together. As if the collapse of the United States wasn't devastating enough on its own, the shockwaves have spread across the globe. It's like a wildfire that couldn't be contained. The heat radiating through markets, governments, and everyday lives in ways we could never have predicted. Once the stock markets in New York closed, their screens frozen in an ocean of red, the world followed. London, Tokyo, Frankfurt all saw their markets teeter on the brink. Entire countries who depended on the U.S. economy for trade, investment, and stability suddenly found themselves thrown into chaos. It's a nightmare that's only deepening as the days go on. Countries with already fragile economies have been hit hardest, some now facing collapse themselves. In Argentina, people are rushing to exchange their pesos for whatever they can get their hands on, as inflation surges to the point where a loaf of bread costs a month's salary. In Greece, riots are breaking out in the streets, as food shortages become dire and the government scrambles to find solutions, while in India, the collapse has caused a crippling loss in jobs and export trade, throwing millions into poverty. But it's not just the emerging economies that are suffering. Even the so-called powerhouses of the world are beginning to falter. The European Union, once a beacon of stability, is now on the verge of economic implosion as Germany's industrial might weakens and French banks buckle under the pressure of unpaid debts. Canada, Mexico, Australia, all are feeling the effects. This global domino effect has left the world vulnerable, exposed to the systemic failures of a capitalist system that is now crumbling under its own weight. The U.S., once the cornerstone of global trade and influence, has not only failed itself, but in doing so has dragged the rest of the world down with it. The economic foundation of our interconnected world is now shattered. These stories are heartbreaking, yes, but they are also a reflection of a larger truth, that the collapse of the U.S. has created an economic black hole, pulling the rest of the world into its chaos. And as it continues to spiral out of control, there's no telling just how much worse it will get. As if the physical and financial toll of the collapse wasn't enough, the psychological damage is beginning to take its own toll on the people left in its wake. Anxiety, depression, and despair have spread like a plague, leaving a trail of destruction in their path. And it's not just the poor or the disenfranchised. It's affecting everyone. Middle-class families, the unemployed, the once wealthy. I've spoken to many of you over the airwaves, and the emotional strain is clear. People are struggling to find purpose, to cope with the overwhelming weight of having lost everything. The fear of an uncertain future, the knowledge that survival has become an impossible task for many. I want to share with you the story of a man who, for all intents and purposes, had everything. Gregory Harper, a once powerful CEO of a tech company that was valued in the billions, was at the pinnacle of success. He had the mansion, the private jets, the wealth that most people could only dream of. But when the market crash hit, his empire crumbled faster than you could blink. At first, he tried to fight it. He liquidated assets, sold off stock, and scrambled to protect what he could. But it was useless. The banks were no longer lending. The markets were crashing at an exponential rate. Within days, Harper had lost everything. His company went bankrupt. His fortune vanished. His reputation, once untouchable, now lay in tatters. I spoke with a former colleague of Harper's just a few days ago. She told me that in the months following the collapse, Harper's behavior became erratic. He began showing signs of severe depression, isolating himself, refusing to leave his home, unable to accept the reality of his fall from grace. Eventually, Harper disappeared. No one knows exactly where he went, but rumors suggest he may have taken his own life. The once great CEO, who had prided himself on being a titan of industry, became a mere shadow of the man he once was, broken by the weight of his own financial ruin. What Harper's story illustrates in stark terms is the psychological destruction that accompanies financial ruin. His story isn't unique. There are countless others like him. And for every individual who spirals into despair, there are families, friends, and communities left picking up the pieces. In the ashes of the collapse, there are sparks of hope. Grassroots movements have started popping up all over the country. People coming together to rebuild what's been broken. It's slow, it's hard, and honestly, it might never return to what it was before. But we're starting to see local economies take shape, new systems of barter and trade growing out of necessity. Communities are pooling resources, creating networks of support, and rediscovering the importance of neighborly care. People are planting gardens in abandoned lots, starting small businesses, and sharing whatever they can to make ends meet. In Detroit, a group of former factory workers has come together to retool abandoned plants and begin manufacturing essential goods for their communities. In San Francisco, a network of farmers markets has emerged, where those with land trade food for services, creating a localized economy of sustenance and mutual aid. It's not a perfect system, but it's one that's born out of the very thing that once held us together, a belief in community. And maybe, just maybe, this is where we can find our way back. Across the country, people are coming together, not as individuals, but as families, neighborhoods, and regions. We've seen the worst, but now it's time to rebuild, to rise from the rubble and find a new way forward. We can rebuild trust one conversation at a time. We can rebuild hope, one act of kindness at a time. And we can rebuild this nation, one community at a time. It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. But what we have now is something we didn't have before. A shared understanding of just how fragile everything is. If there's any lesson to be learned from this collapse, it's that we must cherish what we have, support each other, and work together in ways we've never done before. So my message to you today, dear listeners, is this. Don't give up. Don't let this world crumble to dust. Keep fighting for your family, for your neighbors, for your community. The road ahead is long, but together we can walk it. As this broadcast comes to an end, I want to leave you with one final image. It's a small, quiet moment, but it's one that carries with it the promise of something better. In a once thriving park, now overgrown and desolate, a child kneels in the dirt. There are no swings left, no laughter echoing in the air, only silence. But that child, with hands trembling slightly from hunger and cold, plants a seed in the soil. A small act, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But it is a beginning. That seed, if nurtured, will grow. It will stretch its tiny roots deep into the earth, and in time it will sprout, break through the cracked and dry soil, and reach toward the sun. And while we can't predict how long it will take for this new world to sprout, or if it will even grow as we hope, there's something undeniable about that simple act of planting. It's the first step. A seed is planted, and though the world seems dark right now, that seed holds the potential for life. And maybe, just maybe, we can look at that child with their hands in the dirt and remember that we have the power to plant our own seeds in the face of this devastation.